The great hall has never been so silent. She remembers noise from before, the kind that used to swallow her whole in crowds like this one, the kind that made her feel small and forgettable and easy to leave. But this silence is different. This silence has teeth. It presses against her skin like a held breath, like the entire world is waiting to see what she will do next. And she supposes it is. 500 wolves stand in this hall. Alphas from the northern territories with their broad shoulders and careful eyes. Betas whose loyalty has always been for sale to the highest bidder. Elders who have watched 3 generations of Lunas walk this same marble floor and who measure each one against the last. She feels every gaze like a separate wound, not because they wound her anymore, but because she remembers when they did. She walks anyway. The dress she wears tonight is not the dress of a woman who apologizes. Deep crimson, cut with ruthless precision, it moves with her the way water moves, fluid and purposeful and impossible to stop. Her dark hair is swept back from her face because she wants them to see it. She wants them to see that she has nothing to hide, that she came here tonight not in spite of everything that was done to her, but because of it. At the far end of the hall, on the raised dais where the ancient throne sits carved from black stone in memory, he stands. Calum. She has not allowed herself to think his name in 5 years. She has been careful about that, the way you are careful around something that once burned you, the way you learn to navigate the geography of your own heart and mark the places where the ground is still hot. But she thinks it now. She lets herself. Because she is no longer the woman who flinched from her own feelings. She is no longer the woman he made her feel like she was. He is watching her. She has been watched before, catalogued, assessed, dismissed. She knows the difference between the gaze of a man measuring her worth and the gaze of a man realizing, too late, that he made a catastrophic mistake. What she sees on Calum's face now is the second thing. It always comes too late. That is the nature of it. Beside him, half a step behind in the way that reveals everything about a relationship's actual architecture, stands the woman he chose. Mira, pretty in the way expensive things are pretty carefully maintained, precisely presented. She is watching too, but her gaze is different. Hers holds something sharp and afraid. She should be afraid. Not because anything violent is coming. That is not who she is, and it never was. But because everything Mira was handed, the title, the position, the future that was built on the rubble of someone else's life, is about to be understood for what it truly was. A placeholder. An error in judgment wearing a crown. She stops at the center of the hall. The Alpha King beside her, her Alpha King, the one whose people she has built and healed and led for the past 3 years, touches the small of her back. Not possessively. Not in the way Calum used to, like she was something he owned and could set down at his convenience, but in the way of a man who knows exactly what he stands beside and considers it the greatest fortune of his life. She exhales. She thinks of a girl who waited by a door that never opened. She thinks of that girl's face the morning she finally understood that waiting had become the whole of her life, and that she had been so busy waiting she had forgotten to live it. She thinks of the journey from that door to this hall, everything it cost her, everything it built in her. Then, she lifts her eyes to Calum's and she smiles. Not cruelly. Not with the performance of a woman who has been rehearsing this moment for years. Simply and genuinely, the way you smile when you arrive somewhere you always deserve to be, and you finally know it. She watches him swallow. She watches him understand. And then she turns her attention to the room to her future, spread out before her like territory she has already begun to map, and she begins. 6 years ago, she was no one. Or rather, she was someone who had been taught so thoroughly to believe she was no one that the distinction had stopped mattering. This is the story of how she learned the difference. This is the story of how she walked through fire and came out not unburned, but burning radiant with something that cannot be taken away, because it was never given to her by anyone else to begin with. This is not a story about revenge. People always expect it to be, and she understands why. The shape of her story invites that interpretation, the betrayal, the exile, the return in glory. It has all the bones of a revenge story. But the marrow is different. This is a story about a woman who chose herself. It just took a little while to understand that choosing yourself is the most radical, most devastating, most beautiful thing a person can do. Especially when everyone around you has spent years trying to convince you that you have nothing worth choosing. Let her tell you how it started. Let her tell you about the morning the ground fell away beneath her feet, and she discovered, entirely against her will, that she could fly. She was not supposed to love him the way she did. She knew that even then, in the beginning, when everything between them was new enough to feel like it belonged to her, and certain enough that she had stopped questioning whether it would last. Love like that has a particular quality. It quiets the part of you that knows better. It smooths down the edges of doubt with warm hands until the doubt falls asleep. And then you are left alone with the feeling, unguarded, and that is when you are most at risk. His name was Calum Ashford, alpha of the Thornwood Pack, and from the moment she had met him she had been helpless in the specific way that only comes from recognizing someone, not from a previous life or some mystical bond. Though the mating pull between them had been immediate and undeniable, she had recognized him the way you recognize something you have always wanted and never been able to name. He was tall and certain, and he looked at her in those early months like she was an answer he had been carrying the question for. Her name then was Elia Voss, daughter of a lesser wolf family, no territory to her name, no political currency, no claim to anything except the pull in her chest that said this man, this one, yours. The pack had noticed, of course. Packs always notice. She had felt it in the way conversations paused when she entered rooms and resumed in her wake the lowered voices, the carefully neutral expressions that concealed calculations she was not yet experienced enough to read. She should have learned to read them sooner. She had spent 14 months as Calum's chosen mate. Not yet Luna that ceremony was planned, discussed, dated. She had a dress. She had memorized the vows. She had lain awake in the dark of his bedroom with his arm heavy across her waist and constructed their future with the careful precision of someone who has never had much and therefore treats everything they are given with enormous reverence. She had been so reverent. She had been so careful. She had given him everything. She had not performed everything, not strategically allocated her affections for maximum return, but genuinely, entirely given. Her time, her loyalty, her counsel when he asked for it, and her silence when he needed that instead. She had learned the geography of his moods, the way his jaw tightened when he was suppressing frustration, the particular quality of his silence when something had gone wrong with the pack's eastern borders. She had made herself essential in 100 quiet ways and told herself that being essential was the same as being chosen. It is not the same. She understands that now with a clarity that cost her everything to earn. Being necessary is not the same as being wanted. Being depended upon is not the same as being loved. And being someone's most reliable thing is dangerously, heartbreakingly different from being their most precious thing. She learned this on a Tuesday in late autumn when the leaves had turned and the air had gone sharp with the first real cold of the season. She remembered it was Tuesday because she had been in the middle of organizing the quarterly meeting between Calum and the neighboring pack betas, a task he had handed her 3 months ago because, he said, "You're better with people than I am." She had taken it as a compliment. She had been wrong about what it meant. She walked into his study to confirm the meeting arrangements and found him standing at the window with his back to her and a particular quality of stillness about his shoulders that she had never seen before. It was the stillness of someone who has made a decision. She felt it before she understood it, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the season, a shift in the air between them. "Aaliyah," he said. He did not turn around. She stopped in the doorway. Something in her already knew. The body knows things before the mind will agree to know them. Her hands had gone cold. Her wolf had gone very still in the way animals go still when they sense something in the environment has changed, and they are not yet sure whether to flee or simply brace. "We need to talk," he said. She remembered thinking, absurdly, about the meeting notes she was holding, about whether she should set them down or keep holding them. She remembered the feeling of the paper in her hands, crisp, specific, real, and how she gripped it like it could anchor her to the life she'd had 3 minutes ago before she walked through this door. He turned around then. His face was composed in the way of someone who has practiced this, who has thought about how to do this difficult thing and decided that composure was the kindest approach. She had always admired his composure. She found, in that moment, that she hated it. "There is something I should have said earlier," he told her. His voice was measured and reasonable, and it destroyed her. "I have been unfair to you by waiting this long, and I am sorry for that." She did not speak. She found she had nothing that would fit through the narrowing in her throat. "I have feelings for someone else." He said it simply, the way you say a terrible thing when you have convinced yourself that simplicity is mercy. "Mira Hale has been something between us for some time. I thought what we had was enough too, but it isn't." She stood very still. She thought about the dress, the vows she had memorized, the 14 months, the way he had looked at her in the beginning like she was an answer. "How long?" she said at last. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. His jaw tightened. That answer was its own answer. "Long enough," she said quietly. He started to speak again, the apology portion, she supposed, the part where he would explain that this was not about her worth, that she was wonderful, that any man would be fortunate. She had heard versions of this speech before, from smaller betrayals in smaller lives, and she knew that it was designed to make the person giving it feel better, not the person receiving it. She set the meeting notes down on his desk with great care. Then, she left. She did not run. She walked. She walked through the pack house with her back straight and her face composed and her wolf screaming in her chest like something caged. And she walked out the front door and down the gravel path and through the gate. And then she walked until the buildings were behind her and she was alone in the tree line, and the cold was very real against her face. Then she stopped walking, and she understood that her life, as she had known it, was over. She stayed with her Aunt Dora for the first month. This was not a dignified arrangement, and she was not in a dignified state, but Dora was the kind of woman who had survived enough of her own wreckage to know that dignity was not what a person needed in the first weeks of grief. What they needed was soup and honest company, and someone who would not pretend that things were fine when they very clearly were not. Dora lived 40 minutes east of Thornwood Territory, in a small stone house at the edge of the Ferncliff Pack's southern boundary. She was not a high-ranking wolf, a Delta by position, a librarian by profession, an observer by nature. She had quick, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a gift for silence that was never uncomfortable. She had been her mother's younger sister, and she had outlasted everyone on that side of the family, and she was, at the time, the only person Aaliyah trusted not to make her feel small for what had happened to her. The first thing Dora said when she opened the door and saw her was, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." Nothing else. No questions, no expressions of outrage on her behalf, no declarations about what kind of man Calum Ashford was or wasn't. Just the kettle and the sitting room and the particular mercy of not having to explain yourself to someone who already understands. She spent the first week doing very little. She slept more than she ever had, which surprised her. She had expected insomnia, had prepared for the long hostile nights of the abandoned. Instead, She slept deeply and without dreams, and woke each morning into 3 seconds of blank peace before remembering. Those 3 seconds became something she tracked carefully, a measure of her progress. By the 3rd week, they had stretched to 7. By the end of the month, they were almost 12, and she had started to understand that healing was not the dramatic event she had always imagined it to be. It was this seconds added to seconds, the slow arithmetic of recovery. She was not, however, passive. She had never been passive, even when she appeared to be. Calum had sometimes mistaken her stillness for passivity, her composure for absence of feeling. It was one of his fundamental errors, and one she had spent too long trying to correct from the inside rather than simply walking away from. Now, with the specific clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, she used that stillness for herself. She thought carefully about who she was outside of him. This required more excavation than she had expected. 14 months with a person of Calum's gravity had a way of reshaping you around them, not viciously, not intentionally, but gravity is gravity. You find yourself oriented toward it. She had opinions she'd stopped expressing because they complicated things. She had skills she'd quietly subordinated to his needs. She had been so busy being his that she had misplaced the edges of herself. She found them again, slowly, the way you find things in a dim room. You don't rush, you let your eyes adjust. She had always been good with pack systems structures, alliances, the political machinery that kept large groups of wolves from tearing each other apart. Calum had seen it, had used it, had thanked her for it privately while rarely acknowledging it publicly. She had a precision with people that was separate from warmth. She understood what they needed, what they feared, what they would trade and what they would not. She had spent her time with Calum applying this skill to his benefit. Now, she considered what it might look like to apply it to her own. Dora's connections in the Ferncliff pack proved useful. Nothing political. Dora was careful about that, careful about not drawing attention, careful the way women in peripheral positions learn to be careful. But she knew people, and people trusted her, and through that quiet network, Aaliyah began to hear about opportunities. The one that mattered came in her 7th week. There was a pack to the North 3 territories north, which meant far enough that the name Thornwood carried no weight, and the name Calum Ashford even less. The Greymore pack. Large, old, internally stable in the way that packs with strong beta systems tend to be. Their alpha, Aldrich Kane, was known as a pragmatist, a man who made decisions based on evidence rather than instinct, which in the politics of wolf packs was either a great strength or a slow vulnerability, depending on what the evidence available to him looked like. He was looking for a senior counsel. Not a title, not a formal pack role. A counsel, someone to advise on inter-pack relations, to manage diplomatic correspondence, to be in rooms where things were decided, and to help ensure the things decided were intelligent ones. Dora looked at her across the kitchen table and said, "You could do that." She said, "I know." Dora said, "The question is whether you're ready." She thought about it honestly. She was not healed. She understood by then that healing and readiness are separate conditions, that you do not need to be whole to begin moving. You just need to be moving in the right direction with enough of yourself intact to navigate. She had enough. She could feel it, that specific solidity that comes back in pieces, not a single dramatic moment of being okay again, but a morning here where you ate breakfast without thinking about him, an afternoon where you solved a problem and felt the satisfaction of it without immediately wanting to tell him. "I'm ready to work," she said finally. "The rest I'll figure out as I go." Dora nodded as if this was exactly the right answer, which she supposed it was. She wrote the letter to Aldrich Kane's office herself. No embellishment, no performance. She laid out her skills with the same precision she would have used to lay out a political document. Factual and direct, and exactly as long as it needed to be. She listed what she knew, what she had done, what she was capable of. She did not mention Calum. She did not explain why she was where she was or construct a narrative to make herself sympathetic. She simply presented herself as she was and trusted that it would be enough. 3 weeks later, she was in a car moving north with 2 bags, a cold travel cup of Dora's tea, and the particular feeling of someone who has stepped off solid ground and not yet located what they are going to land on. She was afraid. She was also more herself than she had been in over a year. Both of these things were true at the same time, and she was beginning to understand, in the way you understand things that cost you, that this is usually how it goes when you are moving toward something real. The Greymore Pack territories were beautiful in a way she had not expected. She had grown up in softer landscapes, rolling land, managed forests, the kind of countryside that had been shaped by human hands over generations until the wildness was scenic rather than actual. Greymore was different. The land here was old in a way that had not been argued with. Mountains in the distance. Real ones, with snow that never entirely left their peaks. Forests dense enough that the light inside them was green and horizontal, and nothing like ordinary daylight. Rivers that moved fast and dark and did not apologize for it. She found herself breathing differently within a day of arriving. Aldrich Kane was not what she had built from his reputation. She had assembled him in her mind as cold, methodical, the kind of pragmatism that presents as absence of personality. In person, he was warm in a contained way, the warmth of a man who has learned to be careful with it, not the warmth of a man who doesn't have it. He was perhaps 15 years older than her, with gray beginning at his temples and the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms where things went wrong to have stopped being surprised by it. He shook her hand when she arrived. Not the formal pack greeting the human gesture, direct and specific. He said, "I read your letter 3 times. I don't read most letters once," she said. "Then we're already off to a reasonable start." Something in his expression shifted, not a smile exactly, but the precondition of one. He showed her around himself rather than delegating it, which told her something important about how he understood leadership. He introduced her to his beta, a steady woman named Cress whose handshake was like a political statement. He showed her the council chambers, the correspondence room, the territories map that took up most of one wall in his study. He pointed to the places where problems lived. "This is not a happy situation," he told her, indicating the eastern boundary. 3 packs disputing the river access. It's been quiet for 18 months, but quiet isn't resolved. She looked at the map. She already knew what she was seeing. She had dealt with resource disputes in Thornwood, had watched Calm handle them badly, and had privately known exactly why they were being handled badly and what a better approach would look like. She had never said so. She said so now. "The dispute isn't really about the river," she told Aldrich. "It's about which pack gets to feel like they won. If you can structure the agreement so all 3 walk away with something they can present to their own people as a victory, the actual resource division almost doesn't matter. People accept less than they wanted if they can call it what they wanted." Aldrich looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "All right. What do you need to start?" That was how it began, not dramatically, not with the feeling of a turning point, but with the quiet click of 2 competent people recognizing each other and deciding to be useful. She had expected to spend her first months proving herself in the painstaking way of someone who arrives without credentials. She found instead that credentials are sometimes beside the point. What people in positions of actual responsibility need from the people they bring close is not a list of accomplishments. It is the feeling, confirmed quickly and repeatedly, that this person's judgment is sound, that they can be handed a problem and trusted to think about it honestly rather than strategically. She was honest. She had always been honest, perhaps to a fault. She had softened it for Calum learned to frame things carefully, to choose her moments, to let some truths go unspoken, because speaking them would cost more than they were worth in that context. Here she did not soften anything. She said what she saw. She said when she thought something was a mistake, and she said why. She was not unkind about it, but she was not managing anyone's feelings at the expense of the truth. It turned out this was uncommon enough to be remarkable. By the end of her second month, she had resolved the Eastern River dispute through exactly the framework she had described on her first day 3 meetings, 3 carefully constructed agreements, 3 packs who walked away feeling they had won something meaningful. Aldrich presented the outcome at the quarterly council meeting and credited her by name, which she had not expected, and which meant more than she showed. Cress found her afterward in the correspondence room and said simply, "Well done, Elia." She said, "Thank you." Cress said, "He doesn't credit people who don't deserve it, just so you know where you stand." She understood. She was beginning to understand a great many things about where she stood, now that she was no longer standing in the shadow of someone else's potential. She still thought about Calum. She would not pretend otherwise. Grief is not linear, and it is not obedient, and it does not time itself politely to your schedule. It came in the gaps, the quiet evenings, the particular quality of light in early morning, the moments when something went well, and the first instinct was the old one, to want to tell him. She let herself feel it when it came because she had tried suppression and knew where that led, and she let it pass when it was ready to pass, and she did not punish herself for the timeline. What she did not do was let it stop her. That was the discipline. Not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to be governed by it. She had given enough of her life's direction to things she could not control. She was done with that. The work expanded as her first year in Greymore became her second. She took on more disputes, more diplomatic correspondence, more of the delicate management of personalities and pride that pack politics required at every level. She found that she loved it with a fierceness that surprised her. Not because it was important, though it was, but because it was hers. The competence was hers. The results were hers. No one could take credit for it, and no one could take it away. She was building something. She could feel it, the slow accumulation of a life that fit her, like putting on a coat made for your exact dimensions after years of wearing something that almost fit. The difference is everywhere and nowhere, and you feel it in your whole body. She felt it in hers. The messenger arrived on a cold Thursday in the 3rd year. She was in the middle of drafting the framework for a trade agreement between Greymore and the Southaven Pack, a document that required the particular kind of diplomatic language that says one thing clearly while technically committing to 2 things, precisely the kind of writing that is only possible if you understand exactly what both parties are actually afraid of beneath, what they are publicly demanding. She was good at this. She had come to understand that she was, in fact, exceptional at it, and she had reached the point in her relationship with her own abilities where she could acknowledge that without performing false modesty or the opposite. The messenger was a young wolf from the Ironspire pack. She did not know much about Ironspire, which was itself interesting. They were east, significant in size, historically private in the way of packs that have enough internal strength to manage without alliances they consider unnecessary. Their alpha had a reputation, formidable, deliberate, not cruel but uncompromising in the way of someone who has thought carefully about their own principles and decided to commit to them. His name was Roran Vale, Alpha King by title, the designation given, among packs that observe the old hierarchies, to an alpha whose territory and influence extended beyond a single pack into a kind of sovereign governance over a wider region. There were 3 Alpha Kings in the territories she now knew well. She had corresponded with 2 of them. She had never needed to deal with Ironspire. The message was simple and completely unexpected. Alpha King Roran Vale requested her presence at his seat for a consultation regarding the northern border consolidation, a project she had heard about in broad strokes, the kind of large-scale interpack negotiation that happened once in a generation and reshaped the map when it was done. He had, apparently, heard about the river dispute resolution. He had, apparently, asked several people to recommend someone for the consultation, and received the same name from 3 separate sources without prompting. Her name. She read the message twice. Then, she set it down and sat quietly for a moment, with the specific feeling of understanding that something is about to change, not foreboding, not excitement exactly, but the quality of attention that comes when you recognize a significant moment before you have any information about where it leads. She told Aldrich. He read the message and was silent for a moment, in the way of someone who is pleased and is measuring how pleased they are allowed to appear. "You should go," he said finally. "I know," she said. "I wanted to tell you first." He looked at her. "This is going to be a bigger thing than a consultation," he said. "You understand that?" "I think so," she said. He nodded slowly. "Whatever comes of it, Greymoor's door is not closed to you." "You know that." She did know that. She had built something real here, and Aldrich was a man who understood the value of what she had built. The open door was genuine, not performative. She felt the weight of it, the specific gratitude that comes from having been treated with respect by someone who had nothing to gain from treating you with respect. "I'll be back for the Salthaven signing regardless," she said. He almost smiled. "I assumed you would." Ironspire was a full day's travel. She used the time the way she always used travel thinking, not in the anxious circular way she had once used thinking as a disguise for worrying, but with the clean, forward motion of someone working through a genuine problem. She knew nothing about Roran Vale beyond reputation, and she needed to know more before she walked into his hall. She had learned, in Greymoor, that the most important thing you can know about a person before negotiating with them is what they respect. Not what they want, what they respect. Those are different things, and people will give you far more of what you need if you come at them through the thing they respect, rather than the thing they want. What she had gathered suggested he respected precision. He respected people who did not waste his time. He respected results over relationship not because he was cold, but because he had seen enough people rely on the warmth of personal connection as a substitute for actual competence, and he had decided this was a form of fraud. Good, she thought. She was very good at precision. She was exceptionally good at not wasting people's time. The Ironspire estate was different from Greymoor's more naturalistic territory. This was architecture that had been built to make a statement, but the statement was not what she expected. She had anticipated something imposing, something designed to communicate power through size. What she found was something designed to communicate power through exactness. Every line was deliberate, every proportion considered. It was the built environment of someone who understood that mastery of detail is more intimidating than mastery of scale. She liked it immediately, and distrusted her immediate liking, which was a useful habit. Roran Vale met her in a room with a long table and 3 windows looking north. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 35, with the kind of physical stillness that is not relaxation, but rather a form of complete readiness, the stillness of a compressed spring. His eyes were the particular gray of early morning light, and they assessed her in the first 3 seconds with a directness that would have been rude from anyone with less obvious intelligence behind it. He said, "I was told you are the best person in the Northern Territories for interpact negotiation." She said, "That's probably accurate." Something changed in his expression interest, she thought, the genuine kind. He said, "Sit down. Tell me what you know about the Northern Border consolidation." She sat down. She told him. Not everything she knew. You never tell everything you know in the first meeting with anyone, regardless of their stated intentions. But enough to establish that she understood the problem at a structural level, that she saw the political fault lines the way a geologist sees stress fractures, that she was not going to require extensive explanation before she could be useful. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When can you start?" She had not expected to stay. That was the truth she returned to often in the months that followed. She had arrived at Ironspire with the intention of a defined consultation, a specific project with a beginning and a foreseeable end, after which she would return to Greymore and the life she had built there. She had not anticipated the scope of the work. She had not anticipated Rorin, not in the way of a romantic complication that came later, and slowly, and with the particular reluctance of two people who have both been careful with themselves for long enough that lowering that carefulness feels like a structural risk. What she had not anticipated was a mind that moved the way his did. She was accustomed to being the most precise thinker in most rooms. Rorin was precise in different directions, and the experience of having her thinking genuinely challenged by someone who was not trying to undermine her, but simply operating at an equivalent level, this was unexpectedly, almost alarmingly, wonderful. Their working method established itself within the first 2 weeks. She mapped the political landscape, who held what, who wanted what, who would trade which position for which assurance, where the real friction was beneath the stated positions. He made the decisions. Not carelessly, he questioned everything she gave him, tested the framework from multiple angles, asked the kinds of questions that revealed he was thinking 3 moves ahead, but he decided. He did not defer the way Colombe had sometimes deferred to her competence while resenting it. He engaged with her analysis as what it was information, and he processed it through his own judgment, and he decided. It was an extraordinary experience, being useful to someone who didn't need you to be smaller in order to use you. The northern border consolidation took 8 months. It was the most complex diplomatic work she had ever done, 17 pacts, 6 major resource disputes, 4 generational grievances that predated living memory and required a kind of careful archaeological approach to even understand, let alone resolve. She lost sleep over it, not the anxious lost sleep of her earlier life, but the productive insomnia of someone genuinely absorbed in a problem, turning it in the dark the way you turn a stone to find the grain of it. There were setbacks. There were moments when the whole structure seemed to be collapsing, a treaty she had spent 3 weeks building unraveling in an afternoon because of a slight at a dinner she hadn't attended, a resource allocation she'd thought agreed upon, suddenly contentious again because 2 alphas had met privately and inflamed each other's grievances. She handled them. Not easily, not without cost. But she handled them, and each time she did, she became fractionally more capable of handling the next one. Rorin noticed. He was not effusive, this was not his manner, but he was precise in his acknowledgement. The way she was beginning to understand, he was precise about everything. He said, "That was well managed." He said, "I would have lost that if you hadn't caught it." He said, "Once, in the late evening after a particularly difficult negotiation session, I don't know what I would have done for this project if you hadn't come." She said, "You would have found someone." He looked at her. "Someone less good," he said simply. "And it would have shown in the result." She held that. She did not deflect it, did not minimize it, did not do any of the things she had been trained by years of living adjacent to someone else's ego to do with praise. She received it. She let it be true. She said, "Then I'm glad I came." Something shifted between them in that room, in that moment. Not dramatically, not with the crash and heat of the mating bond that would come later and be its own overwhelming thing, but a small, precise shift in the quality of the space between 2 people, the kind that comes when both people acknowledge simultaneously that something is present that they have both been carefully not looking at directly. She was the one who looked away first. She was not ready yet. She knew herself well enough to know that. She had learned so much in 3 years about who she was and what she was worth and what she needed from another person. She had not yet learned the hardest part, how to trust the knowledge again, once you have been shown that knowledge can be used against you. She was working on it. The consolidation was ratified in the 9th month. 17 packs, signing in sequence in the Iron Spire Hall, the document she had spent the better part of a year constructing becoming real in ink and pressed seals, and the particular gravity of public commitment. She stood to the side. As it happened, it was Roran's moment. This was his territory and his title and his vision, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. Clean, uncomplicated pride. Not the anxious pride of someone hoping they will be recognized, but the solid pride of someone who knows what they have done. The celebration afterward was long. She sat with Cress, who had come from Greymore for the occasion, and with Ironspire's beta commander, and with the Alpha of Salthaven, whom she had known for 2 years now, and she ate and drank and laughed and was genuinely present in a way she had once feared she might not be capable of again. Roran found her near the end of the evening. The hall had thinned. He stood beside her at the edge of the gathered company, not looking at her, both of them looking at the room and what it meant. "Stay," he said. She did not pretend to misunderstand him. She had been thinking about it for weeks, in the way you think about something you already know the answer to but are not yet ready to say. "I'll stay," she said quietly. He exhaled, a small thing, barely audible, but she heard it. And she understood it, and she stored it very carefully. She did not become Luna the way she had once imagined becoming Luna. That version, the one she had built in the 14 months with Calum, the dress, the vows, the ceremony was soft-edged and romantic, and had required her to be smaller than she was to fit inside it. This was different. This was not a ceremony handed to her by someone else's decision about her worth. This was something she had built herself, brick by patient brick, and when Roran asked her formally, not in a grand room, not in front of 500 people, but in the territory map room on a Tuesday morning with 2 cups of tea going cold on the desk, between them she understood that the formality of the question was a kind of respect. He was not assuming. He was asking. She said yes. The preparation for the ceremony took 3 months, not because she was indecisive, but because she was thorough, and Roran's pack was large, and the political implications of a new Luna in a territory of Ironspire's influence required careful management. She managed it herself, which he had not asked her to do, but which she had chosen, because doing so was both efficient and instructive. She learned the pack the way she had learned every political territory she had ever worked in, from the inside out, through the people who held it together quietly, the betas and the pack elders and the mid-rank families whose loyalty was the actual foundation of any alpha's authority. She was good at this. She was better at it than she had ever been. 3 years of being only herself, of applying her full attention to her work without the complicated tax of managing someone else's ego, had sharpened everything. She was not thinking about Calum when she learned he was coming. She was thinking about a detail in the ceremonial seating arrangement that she was not satisfied with, a small political implication in the placement of 2 specific elder families that would be read by people who noticed such things, and she was turning it over in her mind the way she turned over all problems, patiently and from multiple angles, when Roran's aide told her. Calum Ashford of Thornwood had confirmed his attendance at the Luna ceremony. His presence was a political courtesy. Thornwood was distant, but not irrelevant, and the occasion demanded the broader recognition of neighboring alphas. He would come with his Luna and his beta. He would attend. He would leave. She stood very still for a moment. Her wolf was quiet. Then, she said, "Adjust his placement in the reception order. Thornwood is 3rd tier by territory size. He should be sequenced accordingly." The aide noted it. She returned to the seating arrangement. This was the whole of what she gave to the information. She was honest with herself, later, in the privacy of her own rooms. She went through what she felt the way you conduct an inventory methodically, without judgment, just to know what was there. There was something. A residue. Not grief exactly. Grief had finished its work a long time ago. She had given it the time and space it needed, and it had run its course and left, as things do when you let them. What remained was something smaller, the memory of pain, which is different from pain itself. The way you remember that a fire was hot, and understand it completely, and have no desire to put your hand back in. She was not afraid of seeing him. She was mildly curious, in the abstract way you are curious about closed chapters, and she was careful about the curiosity, because she had learned enough about herself to know that what looks like curiosity can sometimes be something else if you're not watching. But it wasn't something else. She checked. She was genuinely not afraid. The night before the ceremony, she sat alone in the garden. The Iron Spire estate had a formal garden on its northern side, geometrically planned, which she would not have chosen herself, but had come to appreciate for the way it demonstrated a kind of optimism. The idea that wildness could be given structure without losing its nature, that discipline and life could coexist. She sat in the garden, and she thought about the path from there to here, the full arc of it, the girl at the door who waited, and the woman who had stopped waiting and learned to walk. She thought about everything she had built. Not in the possessive, defensive way of someone afraid of losing it, but in the way of someone taking stock before a significant moment. She thought about Dora's kitchen and Aldrich's map room and the river dispute, and the 8 months of the border consolidation and Roran's exhale in the evening after the ratification. She thought about the seconds that had grown from 3 to 12, and from 12 to the place where she no longer counted them because she no longer needed to. She thought, I am exactly where I should be. This was not something she had ever thought before, not with conviction, not without the underneath note of qualification almost. Probably, I think so. She thought it now, and it was simply true, and the simplicity of it was its own extraordinary thing. She went inside. She slept deeply and without dreams. In the morning she dressed in the crimson that had been made specifically for her, cut with the precision of something designed to be unmistakable, and she let her hair be arranged back from her face because she wanted people to be able to see it clearly. She wanted to be seen. Not in the desperate way of someone who fears invisibility, in the quiet, powerful way of someone who has decided that they are worth seeing and has stopped apologizing for knowing it. She walked to the ceremony hall. Roran met her at the entrance. He looked at her the way she recognized it, though she had only seen it rarely, and had sometimes convinced herself she'd imagined it the way a man looks at the thing he considers himself most fortunate in the world to be standing beside. Not worship, not the projection of an ideal, something quieter and truer. Recognition. She took his hand. They walked in together. She saw him almost immediately. This was partly the sharpness of wolf senses. She would have detected his scent in any room without looking, the way you know without looking when a door has been opened behind you. But it was also that she had been prepared. She had placed him in the third-tier reception sequence. She had seen the seating chart. She had given herself the information so that the moment of first sight would not be a surprise, but simply the confirmation of something she had already organized her mind around. Still, there is knowing a thing. And then, there is the thing. He stood with his Luna, with Mira, near the eastern edge of the gathered company. He was exactly as she remembered him physically, tall, broad-shouldered, that specific quality of contained power that she had once found magnetic and now observed the way you observe the weather. As a condition, a fact about the environment, relevant but not personal, he had not seen her yet. Or rather, she corrected herself, watching his head turn, watching the moment his nose would have told him something his eyes hadn't caught, yet he had not seen her clearly. She watched it happen. The moment his gaze found her. She had wondered, privately, what she would feel in this moment. She had imagined many versions of it over the years, in the early months when imagination had been both comfort and torment, and she had not yet learned to govern what she let herself dwell on. She had imagined triumph, and she had imagined grief, and she had imagined a kind of furious satisfaction, and she had imagined the terrible possibility of still feeling something that would unmake everything she had built. What she felt was very simple. Nothing that required recovery from. The nothing was not emptiness. It was not the nothing of absence or damage. It was the nothing of resolution, the feeling of a question that no longer requires an answer, because you have moved so entirely past the needing of it that the question itself has become irrelevant. She looked at him across the hall, and she felt that, and she breathed evenly, and she returned her attention to the people directly in front of her who mattered to her actual life. Mira had seen her. She felt it, the quality of attention from that direction, the particular alertness of someone taking measure. She did not look. She had nothing to prove to Mira, and nothing to say to her, and nothing to take from her. Whatever Mira was managing, she was welcome to manage it. The ceremony proceeded exactly as she had planned it. This was satisfying in the clean, functional way that well-managed things are satisfying, not because everything going to plan is exciting, but because it means the planning was good, and the execution was careful, and the result reflects the quality of the work. She was aware, throughout, of Roran's hand warm against hers, of the specific gravity of the vows they exchanged, of the way the pack's collective attention settled into something that felt like agreement, like recognition of something right. She thought, this is mine, not in the proprietary sense of something taken or competed for, in the deep, quiet sense of something that genuinely belongs. The reception afterward moved the way large political gatherings move in currents and eddies, with the specific social physics of a room full of people who are simultaneously celebrating and calculating. She worked the room with the ease of 3 years of practice, which had themselves built on many years of watching and waiting and learning. She knew which conversations mattered most, and attended to them. She knew which personalities required careful handling, and handled them. She was gracious and specific and present, which is all anyone can be asked to be in a room full of 500 people with 500 different agendas. She was in a conversation with 2 pack elders about the Northern Consolidation's effects on inter-pack education agreements when she felt the specific alteration in the air that told her the moment was coming. She concluded the conversation with precision, genuine conclusion, not cutting it short, and then she turned. Calum was standing 10 feet away. He had clearly been waiting for a moment. His expression held the particular arrangement of a man who has been rehearsing something and is now confronted with the reality that what he rehearsed does not feel adequate. She let him come to her. He stopped at a socially appropriate distance. His scent was the same as she remembered. It meant nothing to her except as data point. His face was the same as she remembered and slightly older, and he wore the look of someone who had only recently, standing in this room looking at what she had built, fully understood the magnitude of what he had set down. Luna, Elia, he said. His voice was careful. Congratulations, Alpha Calum. She inclined her head. Thank you for making the trip. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you look well. She considered a number of responses. She selected honesty, which was her habit and had never let her down. I am well, she said simply. He held her gaze in a way that told her he was trying to communicate something he hadn't found words for. She gave him a moment with it, not unkindly. She was not cruel. She had never wanted to be cruel to him, even when cruelty might have felt warranted. She just didn't have room for it. I should have, he started. She stopped him gently. We made the choices we made. They brought us both here. He seemed to hear this. His expression shifted through something she recognized as understanding, real understanding, not performance, and then settled into something quieter. I hope it's a good life, he said finally. He meant it. She could hear that he meant it. I know it is, she said. She looked at him and smiled. Not for his benefit, not as performance or punctuation. She smiled because she was genuinely, completely fine, and the genuineness of it was visible enough that she watched him see it. and she watched him understand that this particular chapter had closed from her side a long time ago and been filled in with so much else that there was no gap left where his name used to be. He nodded once. Then he stepped back and returned to his side of the room. Later, after the guests had gone and the hall had been restored to its quiet and the last candles burned low in their holders, she found herself alone in the map room. This was habit she thought best in here, surrounded by the visual language of territory and distance and the relationships between places. She had come to love maps in her time at Ironspire with the specific love you develop for anything that makes the world comprehensible. Maps promised that even the most complicated geography had a structure, that if you found the right elevation you could see how everything connected. She stood at the large northern map, and she was not thinking about anything in particular. She was in the good empty state that comes after an enormous effort has been completed and before the next thing has asserted itself, the between space, quiet and necessary. Roran found her there. She had known he would. She knew his patterns the way she knew the territories she'd spent 3 years learning from the ground up, with attention and care. Because she had chosen to and because the knowledge mattered to her. He came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a while. This was one of the things she had come to love about him, the specific quality of his silences, which were never uncomfortable because they were never absent. He was always present in his silences, genuinely sharing the space rather than simply occupying it. "I saw you with him," Roran said eventually. She knew which him. There was only one him worth mentioning. "And?" she said. He looked at the map. "I wanted to see if it told me anything." "What did it tell you?" He was quiet for another moment. "Then, that you were talking to someone from another life." "That's all." She turned to look at him. The candlelight made his face something out of an old portrait, all shadow and precision, those gray eyes steady and watching. "That's exactly right," she said. He held her gaze. She saw him reading her the way she read territories carefully, without preconception, willing to accept what was actually there rather than what he expected to find. She let him look. She had nothing to conceal. She had spent 3 years learning to be someone who had nothing to conceal, and she had learned it so thoroughly that the transparency had become as natural as breathing. He said, "Are you happy?" The question was simple, and she answered it without hesitation. "Completely," he nodded. "Good." The word carried everything he didn't perform. She turned back to the map. There was a new project beginning in the south, 3 packs with trade disputes that had the familiar anatomy of resource disagreements covering statospheres. She had been thinking about the approach. She touched the relevant territories with one finger, tracing the borders, feeling the texture of the problem begin to organize itself into shape. "I've been thinking about the Southmere situation," she said. He came to stand close, looking at where her finger rested. "Tell me." She told him. They talked for a long time, leaning over the map in the low light, building the architecture of a solution together. This was, she thought, not for the first time, what partnership was supposed to look like. Not one person diminishing themselves so the other could appear larger. 2 people, each complete, each capable, making something between them that neither could make alone. She thought about the girl at the door. She thought about her with great gentleness, the gentleness you extend toward a younger version of yourself, not with pity but with understanding, knowing what she could not know then, and being grateful that she found her way through it regardless. That girl had been very brave. She had stayed long past the point of wisdom, yes, but she had also, when the ground fell away, chosen to fly. She had gotten up and left the door and the dress and the memorized vows, and she had gone north and further north, and she had built something real, in the only way real things are built, with time and honesty and the willingness to be exactly who you are and let that be enough. It had been enough. It was enough. Roran's shoulder was warm against hers as they leaned over the map. Outside, the Ironspire grounds were quiet and dark, and the mountains were somewhere in the distance, the ones with snow that never entirely left their peaks, and she could feel through the bond the pack sleeping, all those lives she was now woven into, all that responsibility that she had chosen because she had learned that the right responsibility does not diminish you, it gives you context, purpose, the precise shape of something larger than yourself to be part of. She breathed in. She breathed out. Somewhere in the building, a clock marked the hour. The sound traveled through the quiet, specific and clear, and she stood in the map room with the future mapped in front of her, and the person she trusted most beside her, and she felt what she had stood in the garden the night before, and felt. But deeper now, fuller. With the weight of the ceremony, and the conversations, and the seeing of him, and the knowing with her whole body that it was over, and had been over for so long that over. Wasn't even the right word she felt. Right. She felt, mine. She felt here, exactly here, is where I was always going. This, she understood, looking at the map and feeling the warmth of the man beside her, and the pack sleeping in its bonds around her, was not a happy ending. Happy endings were for stories that stopped. This was something better, a happy middle, a life in full motion, going somewhere she wanted to go, with someone who knew who she was and chose her for it, not despite it. That was everything. That was, she understood with a clarity that required no further examination. Enough. The Southmere situation resolved in 6 weeks, which was faster than she had projected. This happened occasionally when your analysis of the underlying fears is accurate enough and your framing of the solution is clean enough, the result arrives ahead of schedule. She had learned not to be suspicious of this. Fast resolution was not the same as fragile resolution. Sometimes problems are ready to be solved, and they simply need the right hands. She spent the weeks that followed doing what she always did after a major project. She stayed visible in the smaller things. She attended the pack's communal gatherings, the ones that were not political but social, where the business conducted was the business of people actually living alongside each other. She remembered names, circumstances, the details that told you what a life was really made of. She listened more than she spoke. She was present in the way that Aluna's presence matters, not performing authority but simply being available, being real, being someone the pack could orient toward without feeling the orientation cost them something. She was in the middle of one of these afternoons, an outdoor gathering near the South Orchard. Nothing formal. The pack's younger families and their children spread across the long grass when she heard from Cress. The message was forwarded from Greymore, from Aldrich's office. She recognized the indirect routing as Aldrich's particular courtesy, making sure it came to her through her own people, not as a surprise through Ironspire's correspondence. She read it standing near the orchard's edge with the sounds of children behind her and the warm smells of late summer in the trees. Calum and Mira had announced a separation. She set the message down. She examined herself carefully. This was her habit, and it was a good one. She found nothing that required management. She found the mild abstract awareness of a person reading about weather in another region. Relevant to note, not personally pressing, and certainly not capable of shifting anything about the landscape she stood in. She thought about Mira briefly, not with triumph and not with sympathy of the performed kind, but with the genuine recognition that separation was hard regardless of how it started, and that she wished no one particular suffering. She had been the injured party in a story that did not need to define her, and she had made sure it didn't. And what came after in that story was no longer her chapter to read. She put the message away and returned to the gathering. Roran was there. He had come out from the estate midway through, which was not something he did often, which meant he had made the choice specifically. She watched him crouch down to speak to a small child who had presented him with something apparently remarkable from the orchard, watching him give the child his complete attention in the way he gave everything his complete attention, and she felt the warmth of it like sun on the back of her hand. He looked up and found her across the grass. She smiled. He inclined his head, just slightly. She had a meeting in an hour, a correspondence review in 2, a call with the Salthaven Beta in the late afternoon regarding follow-up details from the trade agreement that had been her first major work for Roran. She had a full, specific, demanding life that she had built with her own hands and her own judgment and her own willingness to walk north into the unknown and trust that she was capable of finding solid ground. She walked across the grass toward him. The summer afternoon was long and generous. The pack's children ran through it with the complete absorption of creatures who live entirely in the present tense, and she moved through the golden light of it, and she felt the particular, extraordinary, ordinary feeling of someone who is exactly in the right life. There had been a door she waited at for far too long. There had been a morning when the ground fell away. There had been a drive north with 2 bags and a cold cup of tea and the terrifying freedom of a life with nothing yet decided. There had been a river dispute and 8 months of the consolidation, and a ceremony in crimson, and a map room, and Roran's exhale, and all the seconds that had grown until she no longer counted them. There had been every ordinary Tuesday that had come together into a person she was glad to be. She reached him. He straightened. The child had moved on to the next remarkable thing. Long afternoon, he said. Good afternoon, she answered. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the precision of someone reading something they find consistently worth reading. You heard from Aldrich's office, he said. It was not a question. She nodded. Are you all right? She held the question honestly, the way she held all honest questions. Then she said, I'm well. Genuinely, he studied her face for a moment. Then, good. They stood together in the afternoon. The children were somewhere behind them, their sounds carrying soft across the grass. The orchard smelled of warm fruit and dry leaves, and the particular sweetness of summer knowing it will end and offering everything generously in the meantime. She thought of the prologue to her own story often in the months that followed, not with nostalgia, not with the ache of wanting to return, but with the specific appreciation you develop for a beginning once you understand what it was beginning. That hall she had walked into. 500 wolves and a silence with teeth. The crimson dress, moving like water, Roran's hand at the small of her back. She had smiled at Calum across that hall, and the smile had meant something real. Not closure in the dramatic sense. Closure is a concept invented to make grief feel like it has a scheduled end, and the truth is more gradual and more interesting than that. What the smile had meant was simpler. She was fine. She was better than fine. She was the author of her own life, and the chapter with his name in it had been necessary because it had cracked something open in her that she did not know needed cracking, and what grew from the crack was worth every piece of what the cracking cost. She was Luna of Ironspire. This was a fact she lived inside every day and still found remarkable, not because she doubted she deserved it, she had moved past that particular form of self-diminishment, but because it was large and real, and she had built the path to it entirely herself. No one had handed it to her. No one had chosen her for it because she was convenient, or because she fit a required shape. Roran had asked her to stay because she was exceptional at what she did, and because between 2 people who had both learned to be careful about who they let in, there had been a recognition that felt like the rarest thing, someone meeting you at your actual level and choosing you there. She governed beside him the way she had always believed governing should work, as a partnership of distinct and complete people, each bringing what they were strongest in, each trusting the other's judgment in the places where that judgment was clearest. She handled the diplomatic architecture. He made the structural decisions. They argued about strategy with the vigorous honesty of 2 people who respected each other enough not to perform agreement, and they were almost always better for the argument. She had not stopped learning. This was important to her, the continuing of it. She had seen what stagnation did to people who were intelligent and capable, and had stopped being challenged. had watched them turn inward and grow small in the specific way of talent unused. She did not intend to grow small. She was always looking for the next thing that was beyond her current reach, not because she was unsatisfied, but because she understood that growth was not a phase you completed and then rested from. It was the condition of being fully alive. Her Aunt Dora visited in the autumn of her second year as Luna. She stayed for a week in the East Wing, with her quick, dark eyes and her gift for silence, and her ability to make a cup of tea feel like being held. She walked the Ironspire Gardens with her every morning, and she said very little, and so did she, and it was exactly what both of them needed. On the last morning, standing at the gate where the formal garden gave way to the wilder land beyond, Dora looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "You found it." She did not ask what she meant. She knew. She had been found it for long enough now that she no longer had to keep checking. "I found it," she said. Dora nodded. "Your mother would have been very pleased," she said. And that was all she said, and it was exactly enough. She thought about her mother, sometimes a woman who had also known what it was to be underestimated, who had also learned to build her life from the inside out rather than waiting for permission from the outside. She wished she could tell her. She hoped, in the way of people who find themselves thinking of the dead with love that has nowhere to go, that somehow knowing found its way across whatever distance it needed to cross. Roran gave her a gift the spring after Dora's visit. Not a formal gift, not jewelry or territory or the currency of political affection. He cleared his schedule for 3 days without explanation and drove her to the mountains she had looked at from the estate for 2 years and had never been close enough to actually enter. They camped in the old style, the pack way, without the structures of their daily lives. They ran, both of them in wolf form, through forests where the trees were as old as anything she had ever stood beside, and the silence was the deep living silence of a world that has been itself for long enough to have stopped needing to announce it. She lay in the dark of the third night, and she felt the pack far below, the bond like a low hum at the base of everything, warm and present and hers. She felt Roran asleep beside her, his breathing slow and even, that stillness of his which was never absence but always the deepest form of presence. She felt the mountains above them, indifferent and permanent and beautiful for it. She felt herself complete in the way she had been working toward since the morning she walked away from a closed door and decided, without yet understanding what it would require, to go find out who she was without it. She felt the full continuous thread of it from that morning to this mountain. Every choice, every piece of work, every friendship, every grief processed and set down, every second she had counted, until she stopped needing to count. She thought, "I am here." She thought, "I chose this." She thought, "This is what it feels like to live a life that fits." The mountains were dark and silent and real around her. Somewhere below, 500 wolves slept in the bonds she was woven into. Roran breathed beside her. The stars were the particular stars of high altitude, more of them than you believe possible until you're somewhere dark enough to see. She thought about the girl at the door one last time. She thought about her with love, the complete, uncomplicated love of someone who has come through enough to understand that every step of the path was the path, that nothing was wasted, that the waiting and the leaving and the building and the grieving and the becoming were all the same long, continuous thing moving in one direction. She had walked into fire. She had come out burning. She would keep burning, not with the consuming fire of something destroying itself, but with the steady, generous light of something that has found its right fuel and knows it, and does not doubt it, and gives that light freely, because there is always more where it came from. She closed her eyes. She slept.